Have you noticed more trucks on the road? 1300 222 774. How many trucks are on the roads these days? And if you're noticing that there's a lot, that number is set to triple by 2050. That's only 25 years away, that number to triple, which has reignited calls for a rail network to transport freight. One of the organisations calling for that transition is the Maribyrnong Truck Action Group. And I'm joined by their president now, Martin Wurt. Welcome to Afternoons.
Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Now, you live in the West, Martin. What impact do trucks have on your community?
Correct. Well, following on from your theme this afternoon, the uninvited guest in thousands of houses in the city of Maribyrnong is diesel pollution. Because we live slap bang between the Port of Melbourne and warehouses further out west, we experience somewhere around 8 million truck movements through residential streets in the city of Maribyrnong every year.
Right. What does that do for the actual streets?
What does it do for the streets? It makes them really unsafe, and it makes them they're basically truck sewers. You try and avoid going near them as much as possible. And if you're a bike rider, if you're a cyclist, if you're a pedestrian, there's so many streets that are just no go. You just do not want to walk along there. And we're not just talking normal sized trucks. We're talking like road trains. You can imagine if you're a family reversing out of your driveway, you've got the kids in the back seat, and your local road is used by road trains. Like it's such an unjust situation.
The Port of Melbourne have updated their 2050 strategy, predicting a rise in the number of trucks visiting the port could go from 11,000 to 34,000 in the next 25 years. How will that affect the West? I mean, we've talked about residential streets, but how else will that affect the West?
Oh, look, it just impacts us in so many ways. If you look at health statistics already for the city of Maribyrnong, our kids are admitted to hospital with respiratory ailments at 171% above the Australian average. Our kids have got asthma rates 50% above the Victorian average. So our health is already impacted. If you look at the general demographics in the city of Maribyrnong, we're a fairly young population, low obesity rates, low smoking rates, but we have the highest stroke rates in the state. And all these things are associated with air pollution.
And how would rail help?
Well, what rail would do when the containers come in at the port, they'd be moved onto trains and then taken out to what's called intermodal hubs, and then they'd be unloaded there and put onto trucks for the last couple of kilometres to their final destination. And we've been promised this for like 25 years now. Steve Bracks, back in the early 2000s, promised to get more freight on rail, and we're still waiting. The government's recently, with the Port of Melbourne, spent, I think it's $130 million putting in new rail lines at the Port of Melbourne. But that was finished in 2023, and they still haven't removed any freight on rail yet. So we don't know what's going on there. We believe there's a demarcation issue between two unions and the extra cost of putting those containers onto rail. And while it's more expensive, people are going to choose trucks every time.
I'm speaking with Martin Wurt, who is the president of the Maribyrnong Truck Action Group here on ABC Radio Melbourne. 1300 222 774 is the number. Have you noticed more trucks on the road? I'm curious to hear from you, or 0437 774 774. Martin, you're a community organisation that's leading this, but who needs to drive it? What changes do you want to see, and who needs to drive that?
The government's got the levers for change, and there's a number of things that need to happen. Yes, we need to get more freight on rail. We need to clean up our old dirty trucks. Australia's got the second oldest truck fleet out of the OECD countries, second only to Mexico. If we had newer trucks on our roads, it would mean way less pollution. We also need to see low emission zones, like London's done that. They've got areas, around areas, community hubs, schools, kindergartens, etc., where you limit the number of diesel trucks that can come into those areas. And that has reduced their pollution, by about 70%, I think. And also we need the Port of Melbourne to take responsibility for what they're doing to us outside of their port gate. They just don't seem to care. The Port of Long Beach in California, they put in a clean truck program where they phased out the older trucks. And in 3 years, they reduced their diesel emissions by 90%. And here we are 25 years later, we're just talking about it with promise after promise after promise, and you just look at our health statistics and know it's getting worse. The city of Maribyrnong in 23 declared a health emergency in the city because of air and noise pollution from trucks. So everybody recognises there's this problem, but we need things to make a change, and we need filtration on the Westgate Tunnel vent stacks because the government's promising to get trucks off residential streets and into this tunnel. But if all that pollution is just coming out of those vent stacks back over us, it's not going to improve our air quality.
I've got Terry who wants to weigh in on this conversation. Terry calling in from Yarraville. Good afternoon.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I moved to Yarraville over 25 years ago, went away for about 10 years to look after my mum, came back. My asthma is chronic, right? I have noticed the difference within the 6 to 12 months of being back in Yarraville, that my asthma I've ended up in hospital because of it. We supported the tunnel because we thought it was going to get trucks off the road and decrease pollution. We've got this far and now they're not putting in the stacks. It's just outrageous. I'm going to have to move. I am a sick woman because of where I live and it's horrible.
Terry, thanks for your call. Terry calling in from Yarraville. 1300 222 774. We are talking about the increase of trucks on the road and have been speaking with Martin Wurt, who's the president of the Maribyrnong Truck Action Group, with that number of trucks set to triple on our roads by 2050. Now, just one last question, Martin. What changes do you want to see?
What I want to see is I want the government to actually deliver and have proper targets for getting freight onto rail to minimise the number of trucks. But if you look at the growth of the port, it's such an uphill battle. We're so far behind the 8 ball already in terms of getting that freight onto rail. They finished the rail line in 23. Why aren't the trains running now? Why aren't they getting freight onto that rail? We just want them to deliver on these promises.
Martin Wurt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you talking with me.
You're listening to ABC Radio Melbourne, 1300 222 774.